I want to be forever young. Do you really want to live forever?
One life,
forever,
one love,
and ever.
one soul.
Today's March 5th, 2020. I'm BrentNally, and I'm really excited to have a guest today that I have personally learned so much from over the last 15 years or so. And I know this individual has taught countless others so many incredible, wise perspectives that are very unique and esoteric. And it's a message that I believe humanity needs to hear, particularly at this time. So without further ado, Gregg Braden, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Brent, it's so good to be with you. I'm excited. This is our first time together, and I don't know where we're going to go. It's unrehearsed. It's a dance. I'm going to follow your lead. Thank you for that introduction. And while some of this work can be esoteric, it's also based in rock-solid science. These are new discoveries based in peer-reviewed science that simply are not making it into the mainstream. So you're not seeing a lot of these discoveries in mainstream classrooms, textbooks, mainstream documentaries or television on the one hand, and on the other hand, they are changing the way that we think about ourselves, our relationship to the world, and perhaps most importantly, the way we solve our problems. And that's why I'm very passionate about sharing the discoveries. Some of them are discoveries about us, about the human body and our extraordinary potential that we are still discovering and only beginning to understand. And some of the discoveries are about the world beyond our bodies. But ultimately, it's all the same story, because where do you draw the line between us and that world out there? And that's the question. So I'm excited to see where we're going to go today, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in for this first. I think this conversation will probably lead to another conversation, because I think we got a lot to talk about.
I really hope so, Gregg. And let's give you a proper introduction first, so that my audience and everybody else on YouTube can have a full grasp of just who you are and what you've accomplished. So without further ado, Gregg Braden is a 5-time New York Times bestselling author, researcher, educator, lecturer, and internationally renowned as a pioneer bridging modern science, spirituality, and human potential. His research has led to 15 film credits and 12 award-winning books published in over 40 languages. Gregg has presented his discoveries in over 30 countries on 6 continents and has been invited to speak to the United Nations, Fortune 500 companies, and the U.S. military. The United Kingdom's Watkins Journal lists Gregg among the top 100 of, quote, the world's most spiritually influential living people, end quote, for the 6th consecutive year. And he is a 2020 nominee for the prestigious Templeton Award, established to honor, quote, outstanding individuals who have devoted their talents to expanding our vision of human purpose and ultimate reality, end quote. Gregg has a new book that's coming out on May 5th, 2020, which you can pre-order on Amazon now. And check the show notes in the description below if you're watching on YouTube, not only for that book, for all the things we'll be discussing. I'll have extensive show notes for links to all the information. The book is titled The Wisdom Codes, Ancient Words to Rewire Our Brains and Heal Our Hearts. I'm very personally excited about this book. Also, Gregg and his team are crushing the social media game with an immense amount of followers, 890,000 followers on Facebook. I believe, you just got on Instagram, you got the blue check about a month ago, you got verified. That's exciting. 169,000 followers on Instagram, 126,000 followers on Twitter. Blue check, I'm sure, is coming soon for Twitter. And also, I was really excited to learn that, I've been watching your videos on YouTube for many years, but Gregg has his official YouTube channel that just started in December 2019, about 3 months ago, and already 116,000 subscribers. So, Gregg doesn't mean to boast or anything. I'm doing this for him. But this just shows the immense amount of audience that is already tuned in. And I believe that, you're just getting started, brother. So without further ado, welcome, Gregg.
Well, thank you again. And, I don't keep up with those numbers. So I'm excited to hear what I'm hearing from you. I have a team that does a lot of that for me, so I can focus on the work. And, are a lot of people my age who are kind of winding down and downsizing, and we made a conscious effort to wind up and upsize. So we're growing a team, we're growing all of the different areas that we're working in right now. And, you know, the world is changing. My world is changing, your world is changing. And I think there's no longer a question as to whether or not that is actually happening. The question now is what's driving the change and what can we do to make our lives better? What can we do to make a better world? And so although this is the 34th year I've offered this work in one form or another, there is a new surge of interest, and we're working to meet that interest right now. Some of it is in the self-help arena that many people are familiar with, but we're also working on other arenas, intergovernmental agencies, United Nations, some foreign agencies. I just realized I don't know if I'm supposed to talk about it, so that's why I'm hesitating. But all really, really good things, repurposing existing organizations to meet the demands and the challenges that are now at our doorstep in terms of the way that we share vital resources, food, water, energy, medicine, communications, all of those things. And it's all based on the way we've been taught to think about ourselves. And the new discoveries are giving us new reasons to think differently. And I think one of the most exciting discoveries for me, since 1859, we in the Western world have been taught that the fundamental rule of nature is competition, that nature is based upon survival of the strongest, in Charles Darwin's own words, through the book that he published in 1859, Origin of Species. And that book was widely embraced by society at the time it was released. And that society created the foundations for the world that we're living in right now. So the foundation of our economic system is based on Darwin's ideas on competition and conflict, the foundation of the corporate system, the foundation of the way that we solve our problems in our own families and communities, as well as between nations. So as the new discoveries give us rock solid science and reasons to change the way we think, that change we now have the opportunity to reflect in the world that is emerging, whether it's in the policies that we choose or the people that we elect to represent us, whether it's in the laws that we enact, or simply in the way we go about our daily business. It all comes down to the way we think. And now we have reasons to change that. Nature is based upon cooperation, not competition. That was the message to the United Nations. And they heard that loud and clear. So thank you for the opportunity to have some time with you, to meet your community and my brothers and sisters out there in the world. And I'm just going to follow your lead. Where would you like to go today?
Definitely. Well, actually, my first question segues in rather nicely to what you just stated. And this is not rehearsed. This is a free flowing conversation. Yeah. But what you just stated about cooperation rather than competition is what the latest science has shown about the reality of nature. And I primarily, in the last year, since early 2019, have been interviewing longevity thought leaders, mainly scientists. And I've been very fascinated and interested in this for about 15 years. And from actually getting into the field now of longevity, I just mean kind of the industry, whatever you want to call it, a breath of fresh air is that everybody's trying to slow, stop, and reverse aging in this community. So it's a very cooperative community where every single time I'm kind of hesitant, but I'm always surprised that the people I'm partnering with and working with are totally open to cooperation, because we're trying to solve, a big problem. We're trying to slow, stop, and reverse human aging for reasons of compassion that we can get into. But my first question, I want to plug or let you share a little bit about your Radical Longevity special on Gaia. What can you share with the audience about that?
Sure. Well, I think most of our viewers are probably familiar with the company that now is called Gaia, G-A-I-A, used to be called Gaiam, G-A-I-A-M. They have been known primarily for videos of yoga. Rodney Yee was one of their first big people that they were having there. But they now have consciously devoted an entire campus and the funds, the technology, the human resources to developing life-affirming information on high-quality digital content that can be shared in many, many different ways. One of the ways they're sharing that, they have built an entire presentation space, and they actually asked for my input in terms of the stage and the lighting and the microphones and the cameras. They have the ability to broadcast, stream live in multiple languages, really high quality content for selected speakers. And I'm honored to be among those. I am, you probably have the dates. I don't have them in front of me. I didn't know we were going to say this. It's next week. It's when it is, next weekend.
Actually, that was going to be the next thing, Greg. So it's March 14th and 15th in either Louisville or Boulder Creek, Colorado. They're right next to each other geographically, but that's where the Radical Longevity event hosted by GaiaSphere will be.
Yeah, so the event is, it is in the town of Louisville, which is actually a suburb of Boulder, Colorado, in a special building that is called the GaiaSphere Event Center. And it is a live presentation that is also streamed, so people can be there live or they can see the streaming based upon the new discoveries of radical longevity. And, you know, for me, the important thing, the only way to achieve longevity is through healing. So we could have easily called this radical healing as well. And what the new discoveries are showing is that every organ in the human body has the ability to stop the deterioration, to heal the deterioration, the damage that's already occurred, and to regenerate the tissue or the bone or the gland if it's given the right environment. And this applies even to things that we were told could not. So spinal cord tissue, pancreatic tissue, brain tissue, heart tissue. We are the only form of life, Brent, and this is the key. We are the only form of life that we know of today that have the ability to self-regulate our own biology to achieve this kind of healing, this kind of longevity, and many other things. We simply are not taught about this highly sophisticated, technologically advanced technology, our inner technology, our soft technology. We're not wires and chips. We are tissues, we are membranes, we are ionic potentials across cell membranes, and we self-regulate through the choices that we make in our lives: thought, feeling, emotion, belief, nutrition, movement, environment, external environment, as well as the internal environment. No other form of life can do what we do. And this is really interesting for me because there is a new philosophy that is emerging in the scientific community. So let me just state the philosophy and then we'll flesh it out a little bit. Are you okay if we do it that way? Is that good?
Of course, please do, yes.
The philosophy suggests that consciousness informs itself through its creations. So in other words, what we build in our world that we think maybe is entertainment or that we call diversions, books, music, sculpture, art, plays, movies in Hollywood. What we think are diversions are actually us informing ourselves of something about ourselves that we need to remember. And this applies to technology. And this is where it gets really interesting, because if you look closely, and some of our viewers, our listeners, they may know that I come from a world of high tech. I am a degree geologist. I have a very strong background in life sciences, so molecular biology, invertebrate paleontology, but math, physics, computer science, and I was a senior software developer during the Cold War years in defense systems. So I say that because I've had the opportunity to have a very intimate experience with technology. And what I will say is as advanced as our technology appears to be today, from lasers to radar to communication to storage technology and all those things, I have yet to see anything that we have built outside of our bodies that does not directly mimic a function that we already have, that we already experience in the cells of our bodies. Every human has, they say average, whatever an average human is, approximately 50 or so trillion cells in the body. Every one of those cells is about 0.07 volts of electrical potential. Now, if we can harness that potential, bring coherence to those cells, we can direct that potential to our healing, as well as other things. Every cell in our body is a capacitor. It's a resistor. It transmits, it receives, it absorbs photons, it releases photons, it stores information, it releases information, allows us to access information, and that's what our machines are doing. So from this perspective, the complex technological world we're building around us, as cool as it is reminding us of the soft technology that we already embody. And the philosophy suggests that as we embrace the deep truths of our own existence, that we will begin to embody the fullest extent of what it means to be human. We may not even know just how powerful a human is. But what I can say to you is this, that we have this ability to self-regulate. And I know our listeners, our viewers are familiar with the term neuroplasticity, the ability to change the way neurons wire and fire. Well, that concept now goes beyond just neurons. Bioplasticity, the ability to literally self-regulate and change our biology. It goes beyond that, even to the DNA, to what is called genetic plasticity, the ability to upregulate and downregulate genes. When we begin to understand breath, focus, and what are called epigenetic factors. So external factors of environment, nutrition, movement, exercise, all those things. Internal factors, thought, feeling, emotion, belief, compassion is a big part of that. Interestingly, our most ancient and cherished spiritual and indigenous traditions, while they did not have the science, appeared to understand many of these principles. And so as an adult, much of my adult life, I've spent with these indigenous people to understand, what do they know that we've forgotten, or what do they know that we're only beginning to understand, and how does the new science parallel what it is that our indigenous ancestors have preserved? And that tells us what works and what doesn't. The things that work, let's do a lot of it. Let's get as healthy as possible, and longevity is part of that. Let's create the healthiest families, the healthiest societies, the healthiest relationships with other people and even between nations. And the things that don't work, let's stop putting our energy into them and stop doing the things that don't work. So for me, it's kind of, there are two facets to my work. One is the understanding of what our potential is. And secondly is, let's see what it means to develop that potential to its fullest extent. Interestingly, a lot of the techniques that, as I began teaching them in our live events, I'm now discovering that our intelligence services, NSA, and if you ever watch Jason Bourne, I'm a big Jason Bourne fan. Well, the stuff that he's doing, a lot of that came from actual techniques that are being used in the intelligence agencies based upon optimizing human potential for super memory, super recall, super cognition, the ability to self-regulate in the presence of threats and challenge and danger. No other form of life can do this on demand, consciously on demand. So I think this is the next new frontier of human evolution. And it's not the evolution in terms of changing the form of our body, it's in terms of changing consciousness and how we access what our body has always given us access to. So that's a long answer to a short question, but I wanted to lay that out so we can tie into it through the rest of the conversation.
Definitely, and very beautiful words. And I assume that a lot of the information that you just stated is going to be in your upcoming book with, of course, expansion upon that info. Is that correct?
Well, so first of all, a lot of what I just shared will be at the Radical Longevity event, along with the experience and the techniques to implement those. The new book, I do have a new book coming out it is in May. Small format book. It is not a technical book. It's not a science book per se, although I describe some science. It's based, can I talk about this a little bit? Are you okay if we talk about this?
Please do.
Yeah, so it's based on a discovery that was made early in the 20th century by a linguist. His name was Benjamin Lee Whorf. And I mean, you can't make this stuff up. This is how the universe works. He was asked to substitute teach for a friend who was going on sabbatical at Yale University for a course in Native American linguistics. So the language, the words. And he chose to study the Hopi language. Well, what he began to understand is that in the Hopi language, there are no words to describe the past, no words to describe the future. Everything is present, everything is alive, everything is now. So that means if we were all standing beside the ocean and we were looking at waves, the Hopi won't say, hey, look at that wave, because that makes it a noun. To them, that wave is present, it's happening now, it's alive, it is waving. So they would talk about the waving, which sounds very different for us. Well, here's where this is important. That was in the 1937, 38, right around in there. As the biology developed, what was discovered was the words we use, Brent, the words that we use determine not only how we think, but the words that we use determine what we're even capable of thinking about. What we are even capable of conceiving is bound by the language that we use. And our words, sometimes they're vocalized, often they're not. Scientists suggest that we speak to ourselves in words about 60 to 80,000 times per day in our mind. So we think in words, we speak in words, and the words and the phrases literally determine how the neurons in the brain, and now we know in the heart, how they wire together to allow us these concepts. Well, this is where it gets very interesting. The Hopi, as we know, many native, and this isn't limited, by the way, only to Hopi. That was just the first language. But many native traditions, they see a deep connection between themselves and the earth. They say we are one, we are part of the earth. We're not separate from the earth. We're not separate from one another. We are all part of the web of life, is the way Chief Seattle stated this in the 20th century. And now they are attributing this worldview, this mindset, to the language that is actually being used. So with that idea in mind, I described that simply in the first part of the new book. And what I know from my experience with ancient texts, ancient cultures, indigenous traditions, is that we have always, as a culture, as a society, global society, we've always had words and phrases that we have turned to in times of need to help us deal with whatever it is that life brings to our doorstep. So I have gone into these ancient and indigenous cultures and collected and categorized those words that are sometimes prayers, sometimes mantras, they are sometimes chants, sometimes single words, sometimes brief phrases, sometimes they are parables. What have we used collectively as a global family? What have we used in the past to help us in difficult times? And I've categorized them, categories like fear, categories like loss, categories like love. Whether they're from the Upanishads of the ancient Vedas or the Buddhist texts or other Hindu texts or the Christian texts or the ancient Essenes. I've drawn on multiple and disparate traditions to bring and categorize the words that have changed the way we think about our problems and our challenges to help us to get through what life brings to our doorstep. So in a nutshell, that's what this little small, just very small format reference book, but that's what it's all about.
Very beautifully stated. And if I can just share a few personal things. So I was a communications major at University of Kentucky. So we were forced to take a few linguistics courses. So, you very well speak to me because I know how important language is and the creation of language and how language evolves over time. And then also I've learned that our brain has associative memory, which is basically what you were just describing. We can't think of something if we don't have some type of an experience or reference point to think of that. So as an example that ties into longevity, it's interesting that the Japanese language does not have the word retirement. And the Japanese live longer than just about anybody. And Okinawa, Japan, is a small island of Japan that's one of the 5 what's known as blue zones, where you have the most amount of centenarians and super centenarians cultivated there. So a lot of people have theorized that because they don't have this word for retirement, they don't talk about it in their language, they don't think about it. One of the things you find is they just kind of keep going. They keep gardening into their hundreds and, you know, use it or lose it. We all know that. And it's true about the body and the mind. And then my next question that I wanted to tie in, which you
but before you go to that, I'm going to tie in. Now, we haven't had this conversation. So I just want to ask, did they teach you about Benjamin Lee Whorf in linguistics? Is that anything that they're...
It's not ringing any bells, but that was, 15 plus years ago.
Well, so I have spent a lot of time from the early 1990s into the late 2000s in Tibet. I was taking groups into 12 monasteries and two nunneries high up on the Tibetan plateau. So we had a lot of intimate contact directly with the monks and the nuns. And one of the things that we discovered was that they do not track their age. So if you ask a Tibetan how old they are, the first thing they'll do is they'll giggle because they don't even think it's a serious question, like who cares? and then if you say, no, really, how old are you? And they know what year they were born. So they'll say, okay, well, what year is this? So you tell them, okay, 2008. And they'll write like on their hand, like they were doing a pencil on their hand. They'll say, okay, 2008, I was born. And they'll say, oh, look, I'm 120 years old. And they are. I've seen their papers. I've met 120, 122-year-old monks and nuns. And people say, well, isn't that interesting? But now we have specialized neurons in our neocortex that are called cubelli neurons. Informally, they're called mirror neurons. And those mirror neurons don't know the difference between having an experience and witnessing an experience. This is why you can lie on your couch on a Sunday afternoon, watch a football or a soccer game. You're motionless, but your heart's racing. You might be perspiring. Your muscles are tense, but you're not even moving. And these are those specialized cells. They don't know the difference. The brain doesn't know the difference between having the experience and witnessing. So we say, oh, isn't that interesting, anecdotally, but think about the potential. What do we feed our mirror neurons? Because if they don't know the difference between witnessing and experiencing, the witnessing may be outside the body, or the witnessing can be in our mind's eye. The witnessing can be in our imagination. The question is, how do we think of ourselves? Because the way we think of ourselves, to those neurons, the neurons are taking that image that we hold of ourselves, and they're saying, okay, we now have to program the body to match whatever this image is, the brain to release the chemistry. So when we say every year we're a year older, and we attach the significance that our society gives to that, that means a degradation, in some way, some kind of you're losing access to your fundamental abilities. The brain will match that. But in cultures, Tibet, for example, where they don't do that, if you look at these people, they don't look like teenagers, but their eyes are clear, their memory is sharp, they don't have the cancers that we have, breast cancer, prostate cancer, they don't have Alzheimer's. You don't see Alzheimer's. 120, 122 years old, memory sharp, just really sharp. And so you have to say, what is it that we can learn from these people? And our science now is only catching up with this understanding. Now, our ancestors have used mirror neurons to teach students. Yogis, ancient, Milarepa was an ancient yogi that I've studied for years, taught his students to move beyond the limitations of their beliefs by using their mirror neurons. He would demonstrate something that they thought was impossible. And when they saw it, then they had to make room for that in their belief system. So aging and longevity is just one example of where I think language can play a very important part. And as we learn to adapt language that is more inclusive, our Western language is all based upon separation. You and me, them and us, here and there, before and after. And I believe that's reflected in the way we solve our problems and the way we think about our our lives. So it's one aspect of some of the new discoveries now. They're changing everything about the way we see ourselves. So I wanted to share that, and I know you have another question. I want to get right on to it. So we could do a lightning round.
Well, I'll just say it's very exciting times. And I believe I first learned about the term mirror neurons probably from you in one of your YouTube lectures or events that I was watching a decade ago or so. And my first child is about 3.5 months old right now, or months young. See, already our language, right? Months old. And
congratulations.
thank you very much. And my wife and I have been, using mirror neurons for him once they got activated, probably around 2 months or so, about 6 weeks ago or so. We just smile in front of his face all the time, as much as we can. We're both fortunate enough to be able to be home all day with him right now. And he's such a happy baby now, because I think we've stimulated those mirror neurons, and the brain chemistry, as you so eloquently stated, is probably giving all these signals to all of his cells. So this can be very, very powerful. So I hope the audience fully grasp how powerful it is that the things you're stating.
Yeah, and thank you for that, and congratulations on your little one, and how blessed to be born into such a conscious family with parents that know and practice what you know and practice. This is, I think, the next step. This is where we're going in the evolution of our families as well. What is happening is parents are finding, when they encourage these states of consciousness that are very, very natural. Excuse me. When parents encourage the states of consciousness that are very natural, that their children develop techniques and abilities that are considered to be prodigies. They are prodigies in music, mastering instruments in an early age, prodigies in terms of complex mathematics and solving complex problems, because these innate and natural abilities have never been conditioned away from the young people, as they often are in people in our generation and before, because our parents didn't understand this. They didn't know this. So it's fascinating to hear this.
Definitely. And one thing that I really want to tie in is something that you've mentioned a number of times that I've seen on YouTube and researched further, is the 40,000 neurons that are in our heart and how those communicate with the brain. And so, maybe we need to go into a lightning round, and Gregg,
Sure.
We can end whenever. I know that we're pretty much right at time, but Heart Math Institute and Roland McCarty, if you could also maybe tie that in and the significance of this, because it's still not very well understood information, even though I think this was discovered in 2003?
Yeah, well, okay, so you just covered a lot of ground there. So let me back up. First of all, we began a few minutes late, and I'm happy to go. I've got another interview at the bottom of the hour. So I'm happy to go 10 more minutes if that's good for you.
Perfect. And I'll cut that part out right there, and you can.
That's fine. I don't care. I don't mind sharing it with our, it's real.
Okay, sure thing.
So yeah, the Institute of Heart Math is a pioneering research organization, Northern California, exploring the potential of the human heart in unconventional ways based on peer-reviewed science. And these are frontier discoveries that have completely changed the way we've been led to think about the heart. We were taught that the heart is a pump. It is, and that may be the least of what our heart does. We now know there are over 40,000 specialized cells, sensory neurites in the heart. They're like neurons in the brain. They think independently, they feel, they sense, they remember independently of the brain. And that it's through our heart sends the signals to the brain that tells the brain what chemistry to release into the body. And the heart does this signaling based upon our perceptions, the way that we feel about the world. If we feel a sense of well-being, if we feel threatened, if we're angry and frustrated, if we are feeling, again, safe, all of these things. So we get to determine how we respond to the world, and there's a science and an art to that. What we also now have come to understand is that we are the only form of life that can consciously do what I'm about to describe. and that is to harmonize these two organs. So the neurons in the heart, neurons in the brain, two separate organs, but we have the ability to harmonize them into a single potent system that opens the door to extraordinary capabilities that we thought were relegated only to yogis and mystics and curanderos and monks and nuns and special people. Now we know everyone can do these extraordinary things of self-regulation. So this is super memory, super cognition, super learning, as we were talking about, deep intuition on demand, self-regulation of our longevity enzymes that we already have in our bodies. We can awaken those on demand. Self-regulation of our immune system. Who doesn't want a strong immune system? You know, especially in our world today, in this day and age. Self-regulation of resilience, our ability to respond in a healthy way, not just survive, but to thrive in the challenges of the world that face us. All are possible now because of our unique ability to harmonize the heart and the brain, as described through the Institute of Heart Math and in many of my programs as well. I am not their employee. I have worked with them since the year of their inception in '91, and we work closely together. As an independent author, they have entrusted me to share their research in a responsible way and incorporate it into my material. And you will see that done in a number of different ways with their blessing. So, yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I mean, these are some of the new discoveries. The mirror neurons discovered in '94. The sensory neurites in the heart, 91. I'm sorry, the mirror neurons, 2004. So we just discovered 2018, a little over a year ago, a new class of neurons in the human brain. They're called Rosehip neurons that actually regulate our ability to access altered states of consciousness on demand. Tibetan monks use these all the time. So while we know a lot about the human body, how the functions work independently, the new frontier, I believe, is now taking what we know about those independent functions. How do they work together? Because that's who we are. We are a cooperative system of organs and cells. And how do these new discoveries fit in? And the new discoveries keep coming. I mean, we are now on the verge. New scans, new scanning technology, so new machines are revealing new kinds of neurons that we didn't know exist in the neocortex of humans only, no other form of life, that give us the uniquely human capacities of empathy, sympathy, emotion, compassion, and self-regulation of our biology. So that's the new frontier, and I'm excited. I'm excited to share it and talk about it.
It's really exciting stuff. And I'll just also mention, the microbiome is thought to have about 100 trillion cells in our human body, which are non-human cells. And you have the microbiome in your gut. You have different microbiomes on your skin. Last year in 2019, I read a very fascinating article that suggested they might have found a microbiome in our brain. So it just shows, science is kind of like this wormhole that just keeps going more and more, further down. The more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't actually know. So Gregg, to be respectful of your time, we have maybe just a few minutes left. I had a few other questions, but the one I can't miss, what my audience really has to hear from you is what happened about 200,000 years ago to our DNA, and why isn't this bigger news story on the mainstream? Right now in March 5th, 2020, people are talking about coronavirus and things like that, but because the news cycle, but this is really important information that I'd like for you to maybe share with our audience to close us out.
Sure. This is one of those places where peer-reviewed science is revealing new discoveries that are reported and relegated to very specialized journals and papers that the mainstream typically does not see. The language is very complex. They make it complex. It's actually very simple. But the bottom line is this, I'm going to be very clear. I'm a degreed geologist. I believe in evolution. I've seen it in the fossil record. I've seen it for many forms of plants and animals and insects. Evolution is a fact. It's just not our story. We emerged on Earth 200,000 years ago, fully enabled, fully intact, the way we are today. And when we compare our DNA today to the DNA that is extracted from the fossilized remains of the beings that are supposed to be our ancestors, what that DNA is telling us is that we did not descend from these other forms of life. We didn't descend from Cro-Magnon, for example. We didn't descend from, Lucy or Australopithecus. We do have some Cro-Magnon DNA because we interbred with them. We shared the earth with them. We did not descend from them. We showed up 200,000 years ago, and we haven't changed in 2,000 years consciously. Now, physically, I believe we are evolving in consciousness.
Greg, just to be clear, you said 2,000 years. Do you mean we haven't changed in 200,000 years?
I'm sorry, 200,000 years. And where this gets really interesting is when the scientists look at what it is that happened 200,000 years ago to give us our uniqueness and to make us who we are, what they find is mutations in chromosomes, particularly in chromosome number 2 and number 7, that cannot happen under natural conditions. There was a fusion of pre-existing chromosomes that give us our chromosome 2. It's the second largest chromosome in our body. It's responsible for the brain 50% larger than our nearest primate relative. But here's where it gets interesting. Not only were those pre-existing chromosomes fused, but after they were fused, the fusion was modified. It was tweaked to remove and add very specific properties to stabilize that fusion. At the same time that happened, chromosome number 7, there was a mutation that linked our tongue and our jaw and our brain in a way that makes us the only form of life that can have complex language. I'm a musician when I'm not doing what I'm doing now. And as a musician, I always wondered, why can't a chimpanzee sing? You will never hear a chimpanzee sing Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven, even though they share 98% of our DNA. And the reason is because this genetic mutation, this little shift, happened only in humans in a chromosome that was stable for 75 million years in primates. And all of a sudden, ours shifted exactly 200,000 years ago, and others. All of these mutations happening in the same period of time lead scientists to what is now called forbidden territory. They call it forbidden territory because it appears there's an intentionality under what it is that happened in the DNA. We can't say scientifically who or what. It's not the process of random mutations. There's an intentionality. So as a scientist, what I have to say is when I look at the scientific evidence, when I look at the cultural evidence, the creation stories across all of the indigenous traditions I've ever been with, from Native North Americans, here in the American Desert Southwest, the Aboriginals, the Egyptians. I spent a lot of time in Peru, Bolivia, India, Nepal, Tibet, and more. They all have a common theme that say that we are the product of a greater community. And that's not science. But when you look at that, and then you look at what the science is showing, the evidence strongly suggests some kind of intervention. And as a scientist, I have to leave it at that. Scientifically, I have my own personal views and opinions. But scientifically, what we have to say is what has led us to be as we are is not the product of random evolutionary processes, as we've been led to believe. So for me, that's exciting. But where I'd like to go with that is, okay, we were given this potential by whatever 200,000 years ago when we emerged. How do we awaken that potential in our lives? What does it mean to embrace that potential and perhaps for the very first time know what it means to be fully human? And when we discover that, I think it is going to change the way we think of ourselves, our relationship to one another, our relationship to the world, our relationship to our past. And Brent, it may be one of the most unifying experiences that transcends our religions, that transcends the color of our skin, our political beliefs. It has the potential to actually unify the world in a way that I believe, have not seen in a very long time. So it's more than a philosophical conversation. It goes right to the core of the way that we live our lives and how we make the choices in our lives in the presence of a changing world. So I can't think of anything more exciting.
I can't either. And I can't think of a better time now for the audience to hear this message, because we need global unification so much. And so, Gregg, you have another meeting coming up. I want to thank you so much, infinite amount of gratitude for you taking the time to do this. And I want to plug your website. It's Gregg Braden. So that's GreggBraden.com.
Yes.
Check the show notes in the description below for all the information that we've stated. Go out to the live events. I hope when my son gets a little bit older and I can travel, I'll meet you in person at one of your live events. And I hope that we can maybe continue the discussion at a future time. So Gregg, thank you so much.
Brent, thank you so much. I look forward to our next. I want to thank our audience for tuning in today. And I look forward to meeting that son of yours somewhere in this big, beautiful world of ours. Take good care.
Awesome. You too. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Forever young, I want to be forever young. Do you really want to live forever?
One life,
Forever
one love,
and ever.
one soul.
SoundSage.